We are here in the birthplace of historically black colleges and universities. We cannot ask for a better way to begin the HBCU Swingman Classic.
You all are more than an athlete. And tonight, I hope that you all embrace this moment, enjoy yourselves, show up, but also remember that freedom is not free, and that these legacy forerunners that went before you paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Standing in front of the statue of Octavius Valentine Catto. He was a civil rights activist, but he was also an owner of a Philadelphia baseball team. To see Major League Baseball make a commitment with Ken Griffey and the work that Dell is doing to really elevate HBCU baseball players is really exciting. I'm honored to be a part of it today.
All right. Good everything.
Good everything.
Were you out in the streets? Hello, everyone.
I really, as I told Bob Kendrick yesterday, he spent the better part of an hour with us on Urban View Mornings, the president and CEO of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. As I told him, I said, man, I wish I could have been there. That footage was from the beautiful statue we've talked about many times of Octavius Catto, the human rights leader in Philadelphia in the late 19th century, the owner of the Pythians, which was a black baseball team. He was a champion athlete. He was the principal of the Institute for Colored Youth, founded in 1837. We know it today as Cheney University, so technically that would make it the first HBCU. And he was killed. He was stabbed by a white mob as he had locked up the ICY and was going to vote. His partner, Catherine LeClount, another titan in Philadelphia and in U.S. African history, she and he sued to have the streetcars desegregated in the 19th century, won that case in Philadelphia, which is why you see behind his statue a streetcar. And they tell the story of Octavius Catto. And so as baseball players, those 50 young men came to Philadelphia because, as they said, Ken Griffey Jr., to play in the HBCU Classic known as the Swingman Classic. And they went down to City Hall. And like I told Bob, I really wish I could have been there because the brother who hosted them, the councilman, one of the Philadelphia City Council people, is my friend and brother and former Philadelphia Freedom School student, Councilman Isaiah Thomas. And I was like, man, I would have been there. I would have been there with y'all. But just to know that they are there doing that, just to see them in front of that statue, I tell you, it doesn't get any better. That's the momentum of memory. So yeah.
I have a couple of questions. So I talked about a piece that was in the hub.news this week, Elizabeth Jennings Graham. And as I was reading it, punctuation is important. There was like a run-on sentence that led me into wrong information. And as I'm saying it, because I'm live on the air, I was like, that doesn't sound right. Chester A. Arthur could not have been this woman's father. Her name is Elizabeth Jennings Graham, right? Her father, of course, was a civil rights activist. And this is in New York in 1850s, right? In 1850s, she sued the Third Avenue Railroad Company. And as I'm thinking about, this story as well, after the loss of his life, the taking of his life, there was a suit to desegregate or to allow people to be human on these places that they're spending money, right? It just seems crazy. But when I got to that sentence, though, Chester A. Arthur was the lawyer for this case in New York, and then he goes on to be president. And we never talk about him, though. We talk about Lincoln, and we talk about, I don't know all the things, but it seems to me somebody that would win a case for Black people, during the 1850s. Is probably not the worst white person in the world.
No, not the worst and not the best. What's interesting about Chester Arthur is he was the one with the mutton chops.
Yeah.
One of the ones. Arthur was knee deep, neck deep, forehead deep, top of his head follicles deep, underwater deep. He had some elements of Little Lynn Graham in him. Remember, Arthur was never supposed to be president. He was involved in the graft and in the trading in New York. And when James Garfield was assassinated, that elevated Chester Arthur, who was in many ways a political hack. He was right on this issue, but
Right.
it's very interesting, isn't it? And on this issue, he must be given full credit. Like you said, Lizzie Jennings Graham is an amazing figure, and another, as you put out there, you should know. And it's just funny, isn't it, how you can be on the right side of history on certain things, and on other things, and everybody ain't good or bad. Just we need a lawyer. That's
Or,
right.
or because this country, this world is so transactional that people,
Yes.
fall to their opportunistic, defaults. Like, this is the way I'm going to get ahead. And then you
Right.
lie to yourself, like, I'm only doing this to get to this place, and then I'm going to do good. Like, you lie to yourself. But the problem is, once you eat that poison pill, you really can't go back. Your soul is already compromised. And I don't think people realize how deep that is. As they tell themselves the lie that I'm just doing this for I'm just going to help my community when I get there. I'm just going to do this when I get there. I'm just going to sell these drugs, and then I'm going to, do good for the, like you have already compromised yourself, because that's the trick, is to get you
Right.
to compromise yourself. Also, I wanted to ask you, for this man to have a baseball team, I know a little bit about Negro League and how powerfully successful it was.
Yes.
And I just think about our inability to really sit in the success that we have. And I get the horrible people come and they try to disrupt and do all kinds of things because they see the success and they can't duplicate it. They can only take it or dismantle what we've built or mimic. But, can we talk about why, you think about people that didn't have a lot of resources and money, but somehow sold out, baseball fields and arenas and all, like, it was successful. It was successful.
That's right. Well, Bob talked about that yesterday. Not only the biggest single business enterprise in Black community, but the one from which so many others derive: the restaurants, the Black media, the Black press, everything and everybody. And so the 19th century, of course, we know predates the Negro Leagues. There's a player, in fact, in the 19th century or in the early 20th century, who was so good as a pitcher. The owner of the Kansas City Monarchs says the greatest pitcher that I've ever seen, I ever had on my team. And the Monarchs, of course, was the home for a time of Leroy Satchel Paige. But it's funny, Bob was telling the story of how anybody comes to 18th and Vine, comes to the Negro League Museum, particularly ball players, he gives them personal tours. The young man who just got, Brother Zion, who just got drafted by the Kansas City Royals, a young man of African descent, Bob just finished giving him a tour after the MLB draft a couple of days ago. And he talked about how Bryce Harper, when he was with the Nats here, Johnny B. Baker, Dusty Baker made sure them boys went down there. So he gave them tours, and he was talking. And he said they were asking him, these young guys, who is this guy? Because he's not in the record books. But we can't beat him, because what they did was, Bob Kennedy, these guys are really strategic. They have integrated Negro League players into the video games now, but nobody can get a hit off of this guy. So it's like, how's this guy? Who is he? Bob had to remind them that before 1920, when Rube Foster brought those cats together and they started the Negro Leagues as a unit, there were Black baseball teams. And of course, Octavius Catto predates it in the 19th century. It might have been in some ways easier for them because, the segregation, you can't, okay, well, fine. We got everything we need. Now, what's the lesson we can learn? And that doesn't mind you, it wasn't segregated everywhere. One of the best known players of the 19th century of African descent did not play on an all-Black team. It was Moses Fleetwood Walker, who was also, by the way, an advocate of some African people leaving the United States and going to Africa. Brilliant guy, writer. He was an athlete. It's like, so here we are in 2026, and all it takes for us to derive some lessons from them is to know about them. And that's the work you've been doing. People say, wait, who is that? Right? Who write that down again? Yeah, there you go. And as far as Zen Education Project, of course, has a nice page on Elizabeth Jennings, including a link to a young adult book on her Streetcar to Justice, how Elizabeth Jennings won the right to ride in New York. And before they read the hub, it's a lot of people didn't know about her. And then they go back and say, oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I should mention one other thing. Her 1-year-old son died in the New York City draft riots. Remember when they were drafting the Irish to go into? In fact, most people, if they know anything about it at all, only know about that riot because they watched the Martin Scorsese
Gangs of
vehicle, Gangs of New
New
York.
York.
Yeah, but her little boy died in that. They killed him in the New York City train. He was 1 year old. I mean, so these stories are there for us. We just got to do what you're doing, which is, here you go.
And also tune out because they pushed, not that they shouldn't. Rosa Parks. Everybody knows Rosa Parks. They use Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is an avatar for everything. But we don't know this woman who was before her. Before this,
That's right.
we don't know about the Louisiana bus boycott that actually predate. We don't, it's a collective. And then as you're talking, I'm also, the home run derby during this All-Star game was won by Jordan Walker. And these people were losing their minds as if you could have ever had great baseball without us, right? So I'm loving that there are now, not just Ken Griffey. Ken Griffey Jr. has been holding on for there to be this next generation because this is central to him, right? And essential to him. I'm loving this. But why are they mad though, Dr. Carr? As if there wasn't, Reggie. Anyway.
I would say this as an adopted Philadelphian and put a footnote there and say that brother Ryan Howard, the All-Star first baseman, former All-Star first baseman for the Philadelphia Phillies, gave Bob Kendrick and the Negro League Museum $20,000 at the All-Star before the All-Star game. I mean, just trying because they're trying to raise $50 million. They're redoing the whole thing. He said for the museum. But I'll say this about Philadelphians. Had Ryan Howard been in there against Brother Walker and it was two black men, they'd have booed him too. Apparently Bob was telling they were booing the little boys and girls who were shagging balls at the home run. That's what Philadelphia does. And now you control for that.
So wasn't
I'm not going to say that there weren't racial elements because we all know, anybody been to Philly or spent any time in Philly know, but Philadelphia takes great pride in booing everything and everybody. These are people who throw snowballs with rocks in them at Santa Claus. These are people who they had a jail underneath the football stadium because they were getting so many fights. They just had, we'll put the judge under the jail, under the stadium and a football and a jail there so that when y'all fight, we just take you to judge night court. Okay. And then y'all get locked up for overnight. I mean, so they take great pride in that. So I wouldn't, but to see Walker's, and Bob talked about him, giving him a tour, to see at the museum, seeing his family, hey, I'm sorry, Kyle Schwarber, you got beat, man. If you didn't want that, you should have hit a few more home runs, bro. That's all. But on the field, they know what it is. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's probably the single largest element. Kyle Schwarber plays for the Philadelphia Phillies. The All-Star game was in Philly. The home run derby was in Citizens Bank Park, and they mans was losing. So I'm sure it was some Negroes booing too. That's all I'm saying. They love it.
All right. I don't want to look to see something that's not there, but it just makes it interesting, as we watch, from the WNBA on how politicized and racially polarizing sports, there's a lot of people inserting themselves racially into sports, and it's exhausting.
Well, sports is race war. You know that better than I do. You know that better than most of us. I mean, and if we talk too much about the WNBA, the force of our voice might knock Caitlin Clark down wherever she is. She thinks quite good. So we should be careful because we don't want her to get harmed by the sound. Oh, it broke my. Anyway, play the game, Caitlin.
The holding of the stomach when no one touched you.
Nobody touched you. What
is happening?
But I think isn't that the lesson though? I mean, in that moment at the home run derby, it wasn't Kyle Schwarber for the Philadelphia Phillies booing. It's the fans. So you can't, well, I suppose I started to say you can't control, but you could say something. Yeah. But how Caitlin Clark reacts to this, are you going to lean into these clearly white nationalist people, or are you going to say no? Are you going to be like was Paige Buckers or something in Dallas? Say, hold on, wait a minute. So you got a choice, Caitlin. This is up to you now to say what you can control, what you can do. And we know that, just like everything else, there are racial elements in all of it. But the fact that we can see that home run derby and say, is because we have to live that way. We don't want to live that way. But the simple fact of the matter, this is a racist country. It's in the DNA. So anytime something happens, our first reaction has to be self-defense. it's a tragedy, but hey, we didn't create this social structure. So yeah, you got to think that way. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't still think that way in the context of that, because there were some people there. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why you got an imaginary boxer at the top of the Philadelphia Museum of Art statue. And then they make a movie about an imaginary. What the hell?
I saw that. I went to see the Odyssey, and I was like, "Wait, they doing a movie about the making of the movie about the?"
It was in the preview.
Yeah, I said, "Wait, what? What is this? Why are we? Why? Why is this here?" And I don't mess with Stallone anymore. As Trump.
Stallone is he's a wild boy, Tulsa King. But what'd you think of this latest Christopher Nolan project?
It was amazing. I mean, if you're gonna go to the cinema, if you're gonna go to the theater, that's the kind of movie you want to see. One of those big budget, everybody's in it. I was like, oh wait, 5 minutes. This person gets like the Rolodex must have been sick calling up all of these stars.
It's Christopher Nolan. Nobody wanted to be out of it.
Yeah, it was cinematic, and you go into the theater with the shaky chairs and you could.
You went into the.
I wanted to feel that. I wanted to feel the rumble of the horse being pulled into the. But it also the framing of this was it made you, because I studied mythology, was one of my favorite topics because I didn't know anything about African mythology when I was in high school. So I was obsessed with Edith Hamilton and all the Greeks, the Romans, and the different kinds of, what was the Greek equivalent to, the Roman, to Zeus, and what was the name, and it's like I was into it. So of course I read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, read all of those, read one of them in Latin, because we had to we had to translate. So I was into it, and the Trojan horse was the thing that was like celebrated, how clever it was to hide in the horse and bring the horse in, and then you realize it was a war crime, and the way they set this movie up for you to see how horrible. And then I thought about all of the people that go into war saying that they're preserving their people and they're saving their culture and all of this, and they're just slaughtering and raping and being horrible. And there was that crisis of conscience with Odysseus, of like, I'm not honoring God, I'm not honoring Zeus, because there's all these biblical references, right, that we think are Christian. You got to take in, if somebody is poor, you got to take them in and feed them. If they come into your house, you have to wash their feet. I was like, oh, this is familiar. This is familiar. Oh, this came before Jesus. They came before Jesus. They came before Columbus. So I was sitting there. I was like, he's doing all of that. He's challenging all of this. And Odysseus's conscience would not let him bask in the victory because it was wrong. And I was like, we were raised to celebrate wrong, and that's how I walked out of theater. Like, we were raised to raise up the wrong doings of people and then celebrate them and pedestalize them. And this movie flipped that. And every person was in it. And the fact that Peter was in it for like 5 minutes and people were mad that she was playing.
Of course they were.
Troy, which is fiction.
Well, I would much prefer that she play Hatshepsut or an Egyptian pharaoh. I mean, I would go see. I don't know. I'm kind of torn. Talk about ethics and wrong. Parts of that film were filmed in a country that the United Nations and people around the world have widely recognized as under foreign occupation, Western Sahara. Christopher Nolan did not ask for permission to go to Western Sahara, which is currently being occupied under the oppressive thumb of Morocco. He didn't ask for permission. It is indefensible. There's an article I read in The Guardian a couple of days ago, Mohammed Labat, who is Sahrawi. He's a Sahrawi. So the Sahrawi people are the ones that are being attacked in Western Sahara. They are indigenous to there. He said, I'm a filmmaker and I couldn't make a film. If I had a camera in my hand, they would put me in the camp. He is currently displaced in Southwest Algeria. And he wrote an article in the Guardian saying people going to see the Odyssey deserve better, because this was not only unethical, it's indefensible. They're committing war crimes. Anyway, so in terms of how we approach it, so I'm kind of torn. I will probably see it because
I mean, but even that framing wasn't widespread enough for us to have.
No, nobody knows. That's why we're here, right? That's why and again, where do you draw the line? I mean, we we draw lines different places. And as far as the Odyssey is concerned, they will make another one in 10 years or 15 years. There's, Danny Glover, who we continue to pray for as he is, let people know that he's got early stage, I guess it's Alzheimer's is kind of come. He has tried for decades. I talked to Haile about this agreeing a lot. He tried for decades to get a Haitian Revolution film greenlighted and could not get the financing in Hollywood, could not put the money together independently to do that until
Danny Glover could not cobble together.
And Danny Glover in Hollywood. Yet Christopher Nolan could get a budget to tell this funky, indefensible, another remake of another Greek story, and you got a world. Thank God the Chinese don't wait for this, or the Nigerians don't wait for this. I would love to see, and I think that's the appeal of Black Panther. You made up an imaginary country, and Black people flock to see it. Imagine if you told the story of Yasantewa, the Yasantewa War against the British, which happened yesterday, or go into the period of Amenhotep III. And it ain't got to be all good guys. I mean, Jehudimos III basically tried to erase Hatshepsut. That's a great drama. Show that ancient Egypt. No, you can't do that. Why? Let's make the Odyssey for the 58 billionth time. Why? Because we want to remind you all that when we say human, we're talking about us. In fact, let's bring in some non-whites, because the color of the skin of the people are less important than the fact that this is the narrative you should look to when you think about humanity. No, everybody don't take a sword and try to kill everybody. Everybody ain't got an Agamemnon. Everybody ain't got a Helen of Troy. Go talk about it. No, I can't do that. Why? Because y'all need to be reminded that for all of our flaws, we are the definition of humanity. And so we can drop Spider-Man girlfriend in there and put Lupita in for 3 minutes. Just get Matt Damon. And Matt Damon is a great actor. He's done yeoman service and Saving Private Ryan, right? Yeah, that was great. Until I thought about it and said, well, my father and every one of his brothers, except my Uncle Charles, who was the baby and couldn't be drafted, got drafted. So let's be crystal clear. This Saving Private Ryan, that's why Spike Lee made, what was it? The Vietnam.
Santa Ana.
The Miracle of Santa Ana. And then came back with the Five Bloods. He's like, I'm tired of Clint Eastwood making these movies where ain't no Black people in the war. We had to. Right. So, I mean.
And matter of fact, we won the war without the Black people, especially World War II.
The first ones to bust up in the camp. When you see those emaciated Jews, it's, even World War II. Liberators, the book Liberators, they say some of these Jewish victims of the Nazis said the first faces we saw from the United States military that kicked in the door at Dachau at Auschwitz were those Black soldiers. I mean, I'm waiting on that movie. You know what I'm saying? God bless you in this list. But let's make a movie about those Black men,
To getting back to baseball, we didn't ask for permission to start a baseball league. And you need capital, but capital is less and less of an obstacle today with the technology, right? So it's just about the will. And if all of those people who want to take stages and sell out concert arenas, are really about that life, then now we get to see whether people are about that life, right? Like Danny Glover should not have had to hat in hand beg anybody to do a story such as this.
And couldn't get it made. And it will be made at some point, but because we will make them. And like I said, Haile and Shriek took a different path. They are thoroughly independent filmmakers. As they joke, when the Academy sends the screeners for members of the Academy and those related great filmmakers to look and see what they think is films, Shriek has to go get them, because when Haile see the mail, he throw it in the trash. He don't even, I'm not. So Shriek said, "Oh, we should watch it." No, I'm not watching that movie. I mean, and it's not bitterness, it's not anger. In fact, he was coaxed into receiving the award at the opening of the Academy Awards Museum by his junior protege, Avery DuVernay, who, by the way, I understand now is
got another
or the 14th Amendment. Yeah, which is great. I mean, so it takes all of us in all the spaces, but let's be crystal clear. What will change this is when we do what we're going to do without permission. Nollywood, I mean, we come back in 10, 15, 20 years, not even that long. I think the reason that the Odyssey has all this non-white casting isn't unrelated to the fact that Bollywood and Nollywood and hey man, it's a world out there. If you want to show this movie now outside the United States, you're gonna have to put some of us in it. Why? Because we got cameras too, and more money than you. So I'm just like, oh wait a minute, hold on. I'm not saying Christopher Nolan did it for any other reason, but that financial reason, especially a big budget film like that, Hollywood, we not, no, yeah, because you want to make domestic and international coin. And so we'll see. It's a double, well, I won't say a double-edged sword. It's a multi-sided weapon. The
Yeah.
soft power is so how was the dialogue? How did you find the
Well, that was the other thing. They didn't British size it. It was just like
okay.
regular people. Regular people.
Regular people, okay.
Regular people talk. I was like, they wouldn't have said that back then. But I was like, okay, nice device to have it like regular speak. Regular like modern speech. I was like,
oh yeah.
I was like, okay, that was No, it was and it was he kind of shot it in a poetic way too, because it was a lot of flashbacks. It was cinematically pleasing. I did not know the whole backstory, and it probably would have shaped and shaded how, or if I went to see it at all. And so like I'm a little angry.
No. I mean,
but we want to make decisions in full knowledge. You know what I'm saying? A lot of us.
Right.
So what ends up happening is you do a thing, and then you find out it's wrong, and then you either try to defend yourself, which I'm never going to do, or then you over correct, which is also not good. We're going to make mistakes every day. We're going to sit and doing wrong things every day because we're human, and we're also in a space that has willfully miseducated us.
That's
but
right.
The goal is to seek knowledge and to
right.
constantly be, which is why I'm grateful that we have this space. So why did you entitle episode 332 Rock the Vote?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about it. I know you saw and interacted and talked about Bozo's little teleprompter speech, which
actually on purpose.
Yeah, I didn't watch it either, but I watched I read the transcript because for maybe not the first time, but certainly in recent memory, one of the few times, if there are any other times, he read from the teleprompter. So this wasn't.
That's why transistor turned into transgender.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he can't read. I mean, he's illiterate. He's actually post-literate. We're going to talk about that today, too. But the voter suppression that they are setting up for has a very important element. In fact, the central element is to completely sever any notion. Hold on for a second. There we go. To sever any connection between our actions and objective reality. So rock the vote, I thought about it because we have to get out there and overwhelm the capacity of the white nationalists to remain in power, political power at the federal level and at the state and local level. We have to break their political back. People sometimes follow a statement like that by saying that, this is nonpartisan. No, I'm absolutely 1,000,000% partisan. I am partisan because I support anything that's going to advance the life chances of African people, and by extension, through advancing those life chances, extend the life chances of everyone else, because you won't find anything that Africans have done in this criminal enterprise that is now in its 250th year that didn't help everybody else that wasn't trying to harm Africans. Now, there were some whose lives were taken and they were sent to premature ancestorhood because you tried to put your hands on us, and you earned that with your oppression. And the best we can do now in a proxy liberation war is to deprive you of your capacity to harm the rest of the humans. So this isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about liberation struggles in one area, electoral politics. This isn't a zero-sum game where you say only elections or only organizing outside of spaces or only Democrats or Republicans or only Democratic Socialists or Greens or only, no. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is the objective. The objective is liberation. And of course, that is a constant struggle, as has been said. So rock the vote, the flat meaning, the most common meaning, of course, and that stretches back, I guess, 35, 36 years. We remember 1990, if you're younger than that, or if you were just coming on the planet, you didn't know, but for most of us who are older than that, we remember the early days of music television, of MTV, and we remember the Rock the Vote campaign, which actually grew out of, there was a guy named Jeff Iroff who established this Rock the Vote formation and then entered into a first partnership with MTV, saying that censorship is un-American. Of course it's American, but the idea of censorship is un-American because at that time, if we remember, of course, this was the kind of early stages of the assault on the lyrics in rap music and hip hop and this kind of thing. And so Rock the Vote was about, let's get different politicians in to get them up off our neck in terms of policy making. And, it's interesting to think about that period because we remember that period. We could talk about that another time. But I mean, everybody here, if you're old enough, remember that Rock the Vote campaign. But what we saw with Bozo the other night, and what we've seen since then and before then, is also about rocking the vote. In other words, rocking it, destabilizing it, collapsing it, contouring it so that only white nationalists win in elections and all the collateral damage be damned. So I thought Rock the Vote might have a nice multiple meaning in a moment when around the world, including here in the United States, those in power are desperately clinging to it. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Bolsonaro, I always invert the letters, Bolsonaro is under house arrest. 27 years they gave him. And his son Flavio is running for the president of Brazil against Lula da Silva. Bozo has said he's going to impose a 25% import tax on Brazil because they're not acting fairly. Bozo is a clown. He's a circus clown. His brain has melted. And at the peak of his mental powers, he was a diminished human in terms of thinking. And he's been an utter failure in everything he's ever tried. Narratives to the contrary notwithstanding. But Bozo is engaged in election interference and his little errand boy, little Marco, wearing his father's shoes. Not your biological father. I'm talking about Donald Trump. And so they're interfering in the Brazilian election. They're trying to contour it to get Bolsonaro in. The Brazilian Supreme Court handed down something this week, one of the judges, and says that because the former president, the former fascist who tried a January 6th in Brazil, but unlike the United States, they actually have the rule of law that works. So they put his ass in jail where Bozo should be. Well, he got on social media and was basically campaigning for his son. That's a violation of the terms under which he is under house arrest and the terms of his after his conviction, what he couldn't do. So they have taken away Jair Bolsonaro's ability to communicate to receive visits to his house by anybody except medical personnel or any emergency, but he can't talk to nobody for a month because you're campaigning for your racist ass son. And meanwhile, a continent away, Bozo is trying to interfere in the election. So around the world, the United States, those in power are either trying to desperately cling to it or undermine it. The UK has a new prime minister, and it's interesting to read. I was reading Financial Times this week about the new finance secretary. Well, that would be what the Americans would call it, exchequer. The British would call it. She's considered to the right of the Labour Party in England, and so is it a kind of gesture to the markets? We ain't trying to do nothing crazy. I think about all the years Trevor Manuel, for example, was the finance minister in South Africa after the end of apartheid. And when Mandela came in, they want the markets to be calm because, markets are all about perception. We see the addled Elon Musk who picked the pockets of the banks. Well, he's colluding with the banks in many ways, so it doesn't matter. For $86 billion. You remember this was about maybe 5 or 10 years ago? No, more recent. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago. No, more recent. A couple of months ago. Yeah, when he went public with his SpaceX and became the first trillionaire. And now we read this week that that initial valuation has lost $1 trillion off of its posting, so that now the stock shares in SpaceX are a little less than they were when they went public. Before they went public, it was $146 a share or whatever, and now it's back to after it blew up. And once it was high, he went to the bank and said, "Look how much? Give me $86 billion." So they loaned him $86 billion. Now the thing then collapsed back down, and but he got the $86 billion. Meanwhile, we chasing narratives. It's all perception. And so these new finance minister proposed in England, like the old finance minister in South Africa, you telling the banks, everybody calm down, because perception can wreck a whole thing. Remember, there's still a war going on in Iran. Perception can wreck a whole thing. But around the world, including the United States, whether it be Brazil, whether it be England, whether it be France, where Marine Le Pen was cleared to run in the next election, one of the early iteration racists, anti-immigrants, even as the Africa team in Europe, known as France, lost, and even as the World Cup lines up for the thoroughly anti-African white nationalist country of Argentina is going to play against Spain, who's still got some Africans on the roster. But remember, Spain was the first out the gate to try to snatch all of us. And Spain and Portugal played in the World Cup. I'm like, these are the first two colonizers. Some stories that ain't no good guys. But in France, the very France who relies on this African labor to get an advance in the World Cup, France, who now has consistently a better soccer team, better national soccer team, better national football team than a country like Brazil, which dominated forever. But in reading the literature on the World Cup and listening to people about the Brazil team and why they have fallen back, I'm reading fascinating. It's fascinating to me to follow some of this conversation around questions of culture in Brazil and how this rising Catholic conservatism, white Christian nationalism in the form of Catholic conservatism, may have wrecked or at least diminished the Brazilian team, which had its greatest success in the time when the kind of polycultural, polyglot Brazilian culture, grounded largely in Afro and indigenous cultural meaning making, created a style of play and brought players with that style of play into a formation that made Brazil deeply African, even on the field, in terms of how they went about the sport. But that ain't there anymore in the way that it used to be, because the rising Catholicism, the rising nationalism, not ethno-nationalism, religious nationalism, has perhaps even reached into the Brazilian locker room and made them a diminished force on the pitch. Well, France has passed them in terms of national prominence in these global contests every 4 years, but France didn't make it to the final. And I got a lot of friends who are sad about that, because the majority of people playing on France's team, you got all these Africans on the pitch. And I'm like, well, I don't really have a dog in the fight. It's all politics as far as I'm concerned. So I really don't care who wins in Argentina versus Spain. Although apparently they're beefing, talking about, well, anyway, I'm not going to get into that because it really doesn't matter. They beat England and there was a whole beef about the Falkland Islands or whatever. The point is this. Around the world, those who are trying to suppress vast majorities of people are either desperately trying to cling to power, or they're trying to acquire power. Here in the United States, the white nationalists caught the Carr. They're in control of the federal government, and there are no rules, as we saw that nasty piece of work, perhaps the nastiest piece of work, outstripping even bubble-headed Stephen Miller, although they're in league, was on Capitol Hill this week getting his bubble head handed to him by some legislators. Shout out to Ayanna Pressley on the House of Representatives side. And on the Senate side, we saw, of all people, the retiring senator from North Carolina, who came having given up his seat because he probably would have been taken out by a MAGA challenger anyway. But Tom Tillis, having given up his seat, seems to have found what's left of his testicles and went after Russell Vogt. Because Russell Vogt don't know what he's doing. He's a religious nationalist. He's a zealot. Y'all go read, there's over there, Project 2025. Russell Vogt didn't even write the chapter on the Consumer Protection Bureau. He wrote chapter 2, framing the whole enterprise, grounded in the notion of the unitary executive. The idea that the president is basically a king, the thing that was signed off by John Roberts. Well, he was on the Hill this week getting his booty handed to him because he has eviscerated He has eviscerated the protections of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We heard Senator Elizabeth Warren going chapter and verse down through all of these settlements that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had reached with these banks. And then this racist, this Christian nationalist, this white Christian nationalist gets in on a temporary basis. They said, well, he's not going to be there anymore. No, but he's still over the budget, friends. Don't forget that. But he got in and forgave all the banks. So you ain't got to return that money. And when Ayanna Pressley called him a Christian nationalist, and then he responded in his little smarmy way, and she shut him down and said, you be quiet, I'm talking. And then when the chair of the damn committee tried to say something, she said, did I ask you? No. Why are you talking to me? I'm like, I see you, Representative Pressley. We all did. But when she called him a Christian nationalist, you heard Vote say that's a pejorative. It wasn't a pejorative in the March 11th, 2021 issue of Newsweek, you smarm merchant, when you not only wrote about Christian nationalism, but you defined it and defended it. What you think people don't read? We're coming to that. People don't read. So we got to rock the vote because they're trying to rock the vote. But rock means two different things, two opposing things, because the white nationalists of the United States of America who have captured the federal government and too many of the states because we don't get off the bench. Florida's a red state. Texas is a red state. No, Florida and Texas are too many people not voting states. Voting ain't gonna do no good. Okay, you put Ken Paxton in there from Texas instead of James Tallarico, and don't you open your lips. If they retain control of the Senate, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, you go away from him, huh? You say, nah, we ain't gonna return him. You better Ossoff, who was tightening that booty up again on Capitol Hill this week, in terms of him forcing these folks to either lie openly under oath or be quiet. You go ahead. You don't replace Tom Tillis in North Carolina with somebody who is going to advance a policy agenda that they have articulated often. But because we are not literate, we used to be illiterate. We're increasingly moving toward illiteracy, or what the lead author of an article in, I was telling you all, I got the electronic copy, but my digital copy came. This is, we're going to talk about this today. Rose Horowitz, The Age of Reading is Over. Rose Horowitz, covering up my address. Rose Horowitz in The Atlantic will come to this. She would call it a post-literate age. So there's creeping illiteracy, but we're using more words than ever in texts and all this back and forth and emails. But our use of them has been radically altered by the digital age. In fact, what she says is we may have moved from the oral age to the digital age with a brief pause at the print age. The print age may have been just a little hyphen between the oral age, which is all of human history until fairly recently, and the digital age, which is what we have entered now. But in this moment, our deep understudying has led us, in our brief attention spans, where we would rather write TikTok videos or bursts or emojis, has created a situation where we keep asking, well, what are politicians going to do for us? While it's coming out of our mouth, the policy agendas have been posted on websites. While it's coming out of our mouth, somebody says, well, this is where I am on maternal health care. This is where I am on Medicaid expansion. This is where I am on fair housing. This is where I am on universal pre-K. This is where I am on public transit. Okay, I see your hand there. Yes. So what are you going to do for me specifically? There was a time when I was very young. I say very young, not very young. When I was young, late teens, early 20s, when I thought maybe there would be a career in politics. I was a student body president in undergrad. I was the Black Law Students president for 2 to 3 years. I was in law school. Politics came easy to me because it's human contact and you want to do the right thing and people can, okay, yeah. But then I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to teach. It's important. But as I think about it in today's context, what is it that has people have 1, 2 ears and eyes and see somebody literally say something that enters their ears, and as it's entering their ears, they are preparing to say, but what are you going to do for me? And that's why I said I couldn't have been a politician, because my answer would have been, let me ask you a question. Do you ride the bus? No. Do you have health care? Does your mama have health care? Okay, no. Yeah. Do you have any children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews? Do you pay for child care? Yes. Okay, so what did I say about any of those things? You go. So you're not listening. I'll be losing votes because then people say, oh, you're being condescending. This is descending. Against descending, condescending. Yeah, I am going up there. Come on. I am condescending. I am not descending. I'm not coming down there to the no listening, emoji watching, TikTok video scrolling, Instagram fascinated. I ain't reading nothing longer than 15 seconds crew to do anything other than say, let us rise together. Let us rise together. But I'm not coming down there and staying. That's how you end up with Bozo in the White House and you listening to rappers and ball players for your political advice. This is a problem, but it's one, fortunately, we can fix. In the immediate context, we're going to have to rock the vote because that's what they're trying to do. And guess what they're relying on? They are relying on our diminished capacity to tell the difference between the truth and a lie, our diminished capacity to sit and think. And for over 6 years, every Saturday, and then after that first year with Knarrative and Nubia, we have been consistently here, determined to rise together because we have the capacity. So, I think I said around the world, those in power are trying to cling to it. Those who are not in power are trying to get it or get back. And they are targeting a foundational element for legitimizing state power. That's the vote, as long as you have one. Fascist efforts to maintain state authority, they've captured the federal state in the United States. So these fascist efforts to maintain it have increasingly worked to undermine our capacity to assess information and distinguish between fact and false narratives. Bozo didn't stray from that teleprompter because that speech the other night was about one thing and one thing only. Whatever was left of the idea of fact checking and all that, we don't care about no damn facts. The Chinese interfered in the election. The information says that I won the election in 2020. Yes, and the mail-in ballots are not secure. Yes, and we got to pass the Save America Act because it's rational, and I'm the most transparent. And then meanwhile, the fact checkers are like, wrong, wrong, wrong. Go ahead and do that. But he's not talking to y'all. He's talking to a society that increasingly can't process information other than a burst. And he's whispering it to you. And we must, and part of the reason I ain't watching because I don't want to hear Bozo's earworm voice in my mouth with that and then the people. It's pure propaganda. This is straight Orwellian 1984. Diminished capacity. 2 + 2 is 5. It's 4. Yeah, whatever. I'm destroying any distinction between fact and fiction. And I'm using narratives. That's what that was about. So deep reading, this week we're going to continue our Africana Studies approach to reframing this 250th year of the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the United States, underscoring the need this week in a moment when we saw the most, I could say egregious, and that's a word to use, and it absolutely would be accurate, but the most, I won't use stunning because one of the things is you got to diminish people's capacity to be surprised when you put this bullshit out. The most bull crap display of propaganda to ever come out of the mouth of a sitting United States president in a speech that wasn't 2 or 3 or 4 hours, wasn't even an hour, less than an hour, closer to half an hour of Bozo coming on TV. And then when ABC and NBC say they're not going to broadcast it live, even though they streamed it, he has now got his little attack dog, his little bubblehead brother with that nasty piece of work, Russell Vogt, Brendan Carr at the Federal Communications Commission, looking into, can we strip their license because they didn't broadcast? No, you can't. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution is freedom of speech, and they are protected under the First Amendment. But they're going to put out stories. The commercial news and mass entertainment media is going to run several news cycles on whether or not ABC and NBC could have their licenses threatened because they didn't run Bozo live on network television. And people are going to read that or look at it, and they ain't going to read it. They're going to scroll it and see the headline and think that that's a thing. It's not a thing, y'all. And by the way, when I say Bozo or I say BB, the international killer, Brother Michael, I appreciate you, brother, calling in yesterday in Urban View. He's a musician out of Tennessee State University. a musician, and he picked up on the fact that emphasizing over and over again and using certain tones when you do it, that's a way of repetition that can penetrate more effectively in a post-literate society. So these ain't just insulting nicknames, or actually accurate nicknames: bubblehead, nasty piece of work, beep. All of those things are repetition. It's a teaching and learning device. In fact, in this article, The Age of Reading, Rose Horowitz notes, in fact, I might be able to find it quickly because I marked some things, because I think it always is important to bring some of this stuff into focus by reading from the actual passages. And let me see if I can find what she says about Netflix, if I can find it quickly. And if not, I'll just paraphrase. Let me see. Remedial ACT reading scores have dropped. Executive function and language is under assault. Cognitive brilliance is there, but it's not being developed. All this has to do with reading. Let me see. You name an enemy and you polarize the public. Yes. David Pluff. My God. Yeah, you saw that. Anyway, no. What she said was, I had to find another time. She said the producers and the people who greenlight projects at Netflix are encouraging the writers who write these series and write the shows for Netflix to repeat things in the scripts so that they can be filmed and repeated in the episodes of the shows or whatever. Why? Because they understand that people are scrolling and so-called multitasking and doing all this. So they may be watching a 30-minute show or an hour show for sure, and they don't remember what happened 5 minutes before. So either they going back, or they, but now the screenwriters are being told, at least it's what she says, she has heard, people are being told to, oh, here it is. Let's see. No, that's David Pluff, which I think is hilarious. In fact, let me just read this. If Trump is the first post-literate president, he won't be the last. The political strategist David Pluff, an architect of Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. Remember Hope? Now, put a gun to somebody's head. No, don't do that. That's too violent. Raise your hand, so I'm gonna slap you if you can't name for me one policy from Barack Obama. But to be fair to the 44th president, that will be true of Ronald Reagan. That will be true of George Bush. Now, people will repeat what they saw in a commercial. In Obama's case, it's a beautiful poster with him looking here, red, white, and blue, and it says hope at the bottom. He brings hope and change. This is what Pluff said. He says candidates should focus each day on content creation. He advised shrinking every idea into something short enough for screen-addled voters to concentrate on. Quote, if it can't be communicated in an Instagram post or a 10-second TikTok, go back to the drawing board, end quote. Pluff wrote in a New York Times op-ed. That may very well be good, she writes, advice on how to campaign for office in the post-literate era. As a way to practice informed self-government, it portends disaster. So in this moment, we're seeing this attack on our literacy skills. And we're going to use our Africana Studies framework to talk about some of this in context, but deep reading, reflection, and mass movement informed by objective reality is what we're after. In other words, us reading, us thinking together, working on language, listening to each other, responding, building community with the underlying way of knowing, to use our Africana Studies strategy framework, to say, in the words of Mariba Kelsey, to agree, leads to mass movement. But you can't lose sight of objective reality. Prices are going up. Why? Because the Biden administration, stop. That's bullshit. Okay? Stop talking or keep talking. What I'm not going to do is listen to you and try to put that in the place of the objective reality. We got to recover the momentum of memory. And by doing that, that will allow us to confront modern tactics, trying to diminish or even eliminate the vote as a tool of collective struggle. It's one tool. There is no end-all be-all tool. But to leave it in the toolbox is absurd. Bishop Barber, William Barber, he was on with Roland last night, Roland Martin, talking about this, and I'm sure shortly he'll be on Urban View. Maybe we can get him next week. He is promoting, suggesting, if you go to Repairers of the Breach, you can see the website that he is a part of, the organization he's part of. 100-day mobilization, voter mobilization. Go to the polls. Don't go to the polls by yourself. churches, all the rural churches and urban churches, storefront churches, the mega churches, everybody take as many people as you can. And then the next week, if early voting, or the next day in early voting, you double that number. And the next day of early voting, you go get your other people, your friends and families, you come, so that nobody goes up there by themselves. I don't care if the National Gardeners are there, or Mark Wayne Mullen, the white passing Cherokee punk, who is now over Homeland Security, tries to send his little tissue paper faced thugs in. Nah, it's 100 of us here. It's 200 of us here. It's 300 of us here. So someone who has some consternation about going by herself or by himself is now part of 50 or 100 people walking down the sidewalk, going to vote. Where you going? We're going to vote. We're going to break your political back. Where you going? I'm walking on the sidewalk. I ain't got to tell you where I'm going. And then they say, they're going in the polls. Sure are. We ain't got to tell you nothing. And nobody passing out no water. And nobody, no, we just walking. And that's more of us. Now it's more of us. Think of all those documentaries we saw. The children in Kelly Ingram Park in Birmingham, right? The Selma to Montgomery March, the March Against Fear, the Black Power March in Mississippi. You want to participate? Here's your chance. And instead of facing dogs and fire hoses, you face the registrar, and you've already got all your IDs. You got all your chill. You need, Now, I'm going to give you a provisional ballot. You ain't going to give me no provisional ballot. I'm here. Oh, it's early voting. Yeah. You need to go to this poll. That's not true. This is where the army of lawyers, the army of election specialists, the army of people who are not only registering people to vote and checking their registration, this is where the people who are completely partisan in advance of African people and everybody else, like Black Voters Matter, comes in. We must now, as William Barber says, convert this moment into a movement by engaging in that form of mass action. You engage in that moment of mass action. It begins with literacy. It begins with informing yourself. And we're going to talk some more about that. This post-literate era that we are entering, and I agree with Rose Horowitz in terms of where she thinks this is going, is particularly vulnerable to these attempts to literally undermine the foundations of participation in a polity, civic participation, participation in a society, through undermining the foundation of how we look at mass movement. And it's very important to understand, the freedom school sentiment. We're in the middle of Freedom Summer. We're about halfway through in Philly with the Center for Black Educator Development and another Freedom Schools formation. Shout out to Sister Kelly Sparrow and my upgrade, Dr. Shanice Thompson, who's taking over in Bongi in that formation. And, I'm in there on Wednesdays with them, and Asheray Hines and all the crew out there. Shout out to Brother Maxwell and Sister Regina Banks and all the people who were in Philly doing that, holding it down. And our sister Aisha Imani, who has 2 more freedom schools, including one at Sankofa Freedom Academy. So we doing what we do every summer, and it's grounded in a fundamental dedication to literacy, not just reading words and seeing words. No, reading whole sentences, reading whole books, reading passages and debating and discussing that freedom school sentiment. Because everybody's talking about, we need a freedom school. We need a freedom school. Yeah, but what's in the freedom school? It's better to have places where children gather and learn something and play games than it isn't. After all, we've had Vacation Bible School now for since the 19th century. But let's be crystal clear. At the heart of how we think about freedom schools in Philadelphia, the sentiment to educate ourselves is correct. And we must always center the enabling ability at the core of that, of what is under perpetual assault. And what is that? Deep literacy and reflection as a starting point for further action. That's what we have to do. So today, before we get into last week, it was clear from the response. I've gotten a lot of people reach out, and then I've been reading the comments. And y'all, hit, if you're on the YouTube side, hit that like and share it and subscribe it. Keep driving that number up, as Prof Hunter would say, freak the algorithm. If you're in the narrative and Nubia side, if you're new, welcome. People keep joining. Glad to see more and more people. We on the airways. People call in and say, oh, I'm a Nubian. Okay. We're finishing up, by the way, the second emancipation this week. We're in chapters 37, 38, 39, and 40. And then next Monday night, we'll kind of do a reflection. We'll look at the coda, Howard French's coda, and go forth. And, in that book, the second emancipation, for people who are not there, talk about literacy. By the time we end this book with the index, is 490 pages. And we have gone through it page by page, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, all summer. This week, this Monday, will be our 10th week. And for some people, it's been a little bit of a stretch. But guess what? Just like being an athlete, just like being a musician, At first, it's difficult, but the more you do it, the easier it is. And as Rose Horowitz writes in this article, reading is no different. The more you do it, the better it is. The more you do it, the easier it is. She then talks about writing. The last section of the article, long article, she talks about artificial intelligence and the war on writing. In fact, what she says is, I haven't even mentioned, this is about 2/3 of the way through the article, I haven't even mentioned artificial intelligence yet. A number of digital technologies have hijacked attention and made focused reading all but impossible. Generative AI is the first tool to threaten the continued existence of writing. She goes on and says, writing is hard. George Orwell likened the experience to, quote, a long bout of some painful illness, end quote. AI promises a simple remedy. The trouble is that writing is not merely the act of transcribing fully formed thoughts. If it were, it wouldn't be hard. Writing is the way people figure out what they think and how to convey those thoughts to someone who doesn't already share them. She goes on. But remember the conversation I had a couple of months ago now, almost, with the good sister, my friend Imani Perry, when we were at Sankofa, when we were talking about Sterling Brown. And she was sitting there taking notes. She's working on something on Sterling Brown now. Imani's always reading and writing. It's a difficult thing to do, to balance with classroom teaching. I'm a classroom teacher. I mean, there isn't anybody at Howard University over the last quarter century who has taught more students than I have. Very few who would even be in the conversation, but nobody more. And, because we had that freshman seminar. Dr. Dana Williams and I had that freshman seminar for years before they destroyed it. And that freshman seminar, like the Freedom Schools movement, out of which the sensibility that led me to restructure it the way it was, came from, it was grounded in deep literacy. Every fall semester, we read a book together and invited the author, if she or he was alive, into a conversation. Ta-Nehisi Coates launched Between the World and Me in our freshman seminar, in our first year seminar, fresh person seminar, as I would call it. And, but that book, as important as it is, wasn't long enough for me. So we ordered and picked 2 books. We picked Claudia Rankin's book, Citizen, and then both of them came to campus and had conversation with the students and opened up to the whole community and everybody who wanted to come. And over the years, we read Barracoon, which we've read in Nubia, of course. Deborah Plant, the scholar who kind of brought Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon back to public attention. And there are any number of books. I won't go through all of them because we did probably about, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 books before they took it. Wole Soyinka of Africa, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Something Torn and New. Very important. Why? Because at the center of a HBCU education should be a commitment to deep reading and engagement in the humanities. Now, in the neoliberal university, black, white, polka dot, I don't care what the background of the people are there. We're now losing the plot. It's what Rose Horowitz is talking about, what Dr. Du Bois talked about in 1960 in his essay, his speech, Whither, Now, and Why, when he was like, look, this is what's going to happen. Or before that, The Field and Function of the Negro College, a speech he gave at Fisk University, the Hampton Idea, a speech he gave at Hampton University, all together in a book that we also read in freshman seminar at Howard and have read twice in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, The Education of Black People. Getting the book at the center of the piece is very important because that leads to informed choices. And when you take one of the tools in your struggle out, like voting, it gives you the capacity to say, I don't care what you look like or how you sound. I don't care what suit you have on or how cool you are. I read your policy. And in reading your policy, I see that these things I support more than the other candidates running. Now, if it happens that you're also cool, then that's just a cherry on top. But let's be crystal clear. The meat of this is what you are proposing to do and what you have done. And I had to study your record and I had to study what you've said. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say in the United States of America, we are uncomfortably close to 0 in terms of people who can talk about policy. But that's because of our diminished capacity to read, to think, to reflect. And that is a deliberate thing when it comes to politics. So, as I said, this week's title, Rock the Vote, has those 2 meanings. Get out there and do it and stop those who are trying to stop you from doing it, trying to rock it the other way. We're thinking about this in this context. This week we had a conversation on Urban View with State Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins. Shout out to Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins, the blood sister of George Gervin, out of of San Antonio Spurs herself in the the 120th District State Representative Gervin Hawkins, which is the San Antonio area, and the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. We had a conversation with her about the current Senate race, James Tallarico against Ken Paxton, who was completely and thoroughly indefensible. Talk about an unethical human being. I mean, hold your girlfriend's hand when you're walking down the street in London. You separated from your wife. What you shame of? And here comes somebody looking at you and you walk off like you don't know her. I mean, that alone. But anyway, forget that. Who cares? Look at his policies. This guy's anti everything except white supremacy and graft. It's there in his actions and in what he proposes to do. But in the conversation, we had a very amicable, very friendly, very detailed, and very content-filled conversation about a difficult and nettlesome conversation. Difficult and nettlesome, in my mind, unnecessarily so, at this stage, primary last spring between James Tallarico and his one-time colleague in the Texas legislature, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. One day, Jasmine Crockett may be a senator, may be the governor of Texas or whatever, president of the United States. But right now, she's a member of the Democratic Party, still in the federal legislature for now until, she comes into the next cycle, at which point, if people go out and pull the lever. Our friend and brother, Freddie Haynes, Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes, Friendship West Church, Baptist Church there in the Dallas area, will be the congressperson in that district. But the primary is over. And we're still talking about the primary. Meanwhile, this slow-eyed white nationalist is licking at the chops, trying to figure out how he's going to steal another election in a state where not enough people vote. If everybody had to vote in Texas and was required to vote, there would never be another white nationalist elected in that state. Unfortunately, in a post-literate area, in an imminent post-literate era where we get our information from nowhere, scrolling and everybody floating, talking everything all the time, Hawkins was good enough to join us. We had the conversation about what can and should Tallarico do? What do you think? What do you see? She was very clear-eyed. And then a couple of days later, we were able to talk to James Tallarico himself. Yes, right. From the 50th district in the Texas state legislature, running for Senate. And before I asked him, why don't you want to talk to Black people, Representative Tallarico, which is what I asked him, I prefaced it with about 45 seconds of all the places he's been and all the people he done talked to, just a slim tally of Black spaces, commencement speaker Paul Quinn, okay, that's a man, but meetings and people and all these folks. And at the end of it, I said, and so why don't you want to talk to Black people? And he just smiled and then went into his campaign stuff, his policies. He said, no, well, but I'd already robbed it of the force of you don't talk to Black people by actually, I don't know, what can you say? Let me think. I'm looking for the word. Yeah, reading. Part of political maturity is being able to recognize something. My feelings are hurt, but he didn't talk to me. You know how many millions of people are in Texas? And apparently there's a couple of town halls that he announced, one in Houston, one in the Dallas area coming up next week. And you look it up, go on his website, find out, show up. He said, ask me anything. Now, town hall is one form. Representative Christopher Rabb, who's coming into the federal legislature, coming into Congress from Philadelphia, said that he doesn't do town halls. And I learned this after talking to Tallarico, otherwise I would have asked him about this as well. He said he goes to places where people don't expect him to show up. And I expected some of that and then listen to them in those forums, and people find out maybe later, or maybe they find out just before he's in the barbershop or he's in the community or wherever he is knocking on doors. I'm sure there will be part of that too, and there will be some of that too. And I know because we know that Representative Gervin Hawkins said she was going to, she knows him. She talked about working across the aisle with other people in those white nationalists to get policy done. A couple of the things that we mentioned in the interview with him, of course, was his stance and what he's done in the Texas legislature when it comes to pre-K and funding for pre-K. He talked about maternal health and some other things that we asked about Black issues. Last I checked, Black women have wombs and need health care and housing and those things. These are Black issues. They also help other people. It's time to be mature. Now, is he going to go out there and vote for HR 40 and reparations? No. Or yeah, depending on what we do. Once he get into office, you don't let up on his neck. And if you go up there and show your behind, then we put Jasmine Crockett in next time. But that's going to require everybody checking their registration, getting them to vote, and doing more than vote at 20 or 30% Harris County. Let's be crystal clear. Well, they didn't have the voting lines open. If they had opened the lines to everybody who tried to show up and vote, she still would have lost. Why? Because not enough of us go out to vote. You don't believe it? Don't argue with me. Argue with the facts. Stop blurring objective reality. But my point is that these conversations have to be tough on the substance. Now we could do the, gotcha. Hey, that felt good. Yeah, and what happened? You see that white nationalist coming in there now laughing at y'all? That idiot who thinks you're not human and is going to push policies to do it? So what that get us? Huh? Okay, y'all can come in Monday night if you want, in newbie if you're not, and you can tie me up in the, on the YouTube side. I don't want to say that. I mean, I, for example, enjoy all the smoke, because it's a learning process. Because anytime somebody says that, something to me about that, my general reply is, please be very specific in terms of policy as to where we have disagreement. We can talk about the policy. But if you don't like that I said it, it's probably because, as my mama or grandmama might say, the hit dog hollers. And that hot water is hot when it comes out the back porch in Layton and Seal, Alabama, and hits them dogs out there thinking it was cornbread coming out, but it's really old bath water. And then they get hit and start. The bath water in this metaphor is the, have you taken the time to study the policy? So if you haven't, then it hits you, that's going to be a problem. So, just at the end of our conversation with Representative Tallarico, our sister, Dr. Ajua Batwe Asmoah, came in and to announce that the Asantehene, the king of the Ashantis, is coming to the United States in late August. More on that later. And they brought me, representative of the Ghana and the Ashanti people, this beautiful book. Look at this book. This is Otumfo Osetutu, the second 20 years celebrating 2 decades of achievement at 20. And then I had to open it up. Here's the king of the Ashantis. He's coming in August, late August of this year. They've already got the ritual set up for Bowie State University. And let me stop looking at this, because I was just like, man, y'all brought me this book. This is not a book I could buy at any price. You had to bring this from Africa. But my point is, shout out, Aj. I appreciate you, sis. But she came in, but they came in just before it was time for them to come in. We were right at about 9. We were supposed to come in at 9:30 for them. And so they came in about 9:20. And so I motioned to Daryl Green, hey man, tell Aj to come in here. Because Ajua and Jasmine Crockett, they like this. And let's get this sister to ask him a question in case there's something put some way or in a way that didn't cover everything. And she came in and asked. She said, a lot of her voters like you, what are you doing? And then he answered that question. I'm like, okay, I feel comfortable. There are going to be people who are not satisfied with that. I embrace that fully. God knows none of us are perfect, and I'm certainly no exception to that. So if there was a way to do it differently, fine. And guess what? I suspect this won't be his last time in conversation on Sirius. He's been on with Roland. He's going to, and saw all these other places he's going. God knows he'll probably show up with Lenore McKelvey, and I hope it's not. So tell me, what can you do for Black people? Anyway, that's fine. You know what I'm saying? Because that's all comes with it. We're entering a post-literate age. You got to do that kind of work. But the wild card in all of this is us rocking the vote, is us participating. And some of that's going to involve informing ourselves as we go out. So as I said, what's going on around the world? It's very serious. And it's here in the United States. Bozo's speech to lie about Chinese interference, the Chinese did get that. They got the data that you and I could get, public data. What were they trying to do? They was trying to infiltrate social media where we look. Sure. Russia, he barely mentioned Russia. But guess what? All those documents that Bozo dumped on the websites and saying, here's the information. When you read through the information, again, requiring reading, you know what it said? That stuff is like saying the opposite of what Bozo said. It's like watching that opening scene in Superfly, and then you hear Curtis Mayfield singing, Freddy's dead, that's what I said. It's hard to understand. There was love in this man. I'm sure I would agree. that his misery was his woman and things. Now Freddie's dead. That's what I said. Freddie's dead. But the movie about a pimp. Mayfield got the contract for the soundtrack of Superfly and in many ways wrote songs that critique the film. Are you listening? And years later, people watch Superfly. They've remade Superfly like they remade the Odyssey. How you remaking the Odyssey and on our side, you remaking Superfly? Don't even think about it because it's obvious. But the point is this. Mayfield took the chance making a soundtrack that provided a critique. Bozo got on TV, made up all these lies, said he released all these documents. And when you read through the documents, it supports the exact opposite of what Bozo is talking about. You mentioned the Russians in passing. Yeah, the Russians interfered, Chinese too, but the Russians interfered to get you elected. Ain't that what George Jetson told you? I'm sorry, John Ratcliffe, the first director of national intelligence that you got rid of and then sent him around the world to do other dirty work. Ratcliffe told Bozo that the evidence that I've seen says that whatever interference didn't work for Biden, but against him. But the objective reality, Bozo has dismantled the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He has fired 3 members. That's the people who are checking for all this defense. Then he get on TV and say, we're defenseless. You're the one who dropped the defenses, fired 3 members, Bozo did, of the Election Assistance Commission, including a brother who was the chair named Thomas Hicks. Now they can't even meet. They don't have a quorum. And then you get on TV and say, oh, we're less secure than before. This, the federal agency, is supposed to help the states because the states run the elections, not the feds, but you're starving the entity that's supposed to support the states in their efforts. Because you got my tax money and you don't want to give it to the states because you're trying to steal an election. And you want to do it by saying that the elections aren't secure. We understand what's going on, Bozo. That commission, that Election Assistance Commission, chaired by a black man until Bozo got rid of him and 2 other commissioners, depriving them of a quorum to ever even be able to meet, was established in 2002 under the Help America Vote Act after the election of 2000, rather, the election of 2000. You know, that's the one where John Boy Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, Beer Kavanaugh, among the many other lawyers, were in Florida. Comey Barrett was kind of on the other side, but they were all down there, and 10 toes down, Beer Kavanaugh and John Boy Roberts, 3 of the current MAGA 6. Although Comey Barrett was on Capitol Hill last week with Elena Kagan talking about issues related to the Supreme Court and security and all that. Y'all worry about security? You should be worried about security. You should be worried even more about security. It's nice to have 2 of y'all women who are together from different sides ideologically to talk about this. But the reason that this is a thing, you want to know how you can predict where this country is going? Why don't you go back to the 19th century? Why don't you go back to the 1850s and the 1860s, the lead up to the Civil War? Why don't you go up to the 1920s and 30s with all the anti-immigrant fear and how that spread into violence in the United States? Why don't you come to the 1960s and 70s? There are precedents. We know what's going to happen next because we know what happened before. And unlike those previous generations, they didn't have social media to organize it just like that and tell everybody where everybody's going to be. So have a flash mob of violence. But Comey Barrett, Beer Kavanaugh, John Boy Roberts, all of them was in Florida in 2000 trying to figure out a way in terms of Roberts and Kavanaugh how they could steal the election, and they succeeded when the Supreme Court of the United States in Bush versus Gore stopped the state of Florida from counting the votes. Because if they had kept counting them votes, Al Gore would have been president of the United States. Maybe if Al Gore is president of the United States, you don't get a Barack Obama. Who knows? That's all speculation. Leave that to the filmmakers because you ain't nobody going to write no novel and read it these days, apparently in a post-literate age. But my point is that these things are not disconnected. And 2 years later, Congress is like, we can't never have that again. So let's do a Help America Vote Act. And part of it, we're going to have a Federal Election Assistance Commission. And Bozo dismantled it a few days ago. Then got on TV and said, we're not secure. Don't do that. And then the white passing Cherokee, Mark Wayne Mullen, Mr. Two Names, former senator from Oklahoma, who is now over Homeland Security, said yesterday, we're going to jail officials that don't comply with Bozo's policies. You can't do it, punk. But you're going to wrestle everybody in the world? You can't do it. You can't do it, sir. But by saying it, and then it gets spread as disinformation, this is the objective. The documentary evidence refutes everything Bozo was talking about. But we're in a post-literate time, and that's why Rose Horowitz refers to him as the post-literate president. She says, Trump is our first post-literate president. It is difficult to imagine him being elected leader of a country where information is primarily spread through text, not text with your thumbs, text as in reading. She says, ahead of the 2024 election, an NBC News poll of 1,000 voters found that Joe Biden had a 49-point lead among respondents who read newspapers. I walked in the classroom this week. We have from 9 to 12, we have student athletes, first year football players, basketball players, volleyball players. Shout out to all my students. In the afternoon, 1 to 4, we have students from the Carr STEM scholars, top rate students who are going to study the sciences, go off to graduate school, get PhDs, and also students from the social sciences and humanities formation, students who are going to go off to graduate school. They're all first year students, all these students. I walked into the early class with my newspaper. Financial Times, New York Times, magazines, and I had the newspaper out. One of the young brothers said, they still print newspapers? I said, yeah, I read it every day. Wow. And one of the young sisters, volleyball player, first year volleyball player, sitting, we were in a circle, a square, had all the tables set up like that. So you're talking about 25 students. So she says, ooh, can I try the crossword? And I said, this New York Times crossword, it gets progressively more difficult every day. And I usually time myself on the crossword. If I can get through a crossword in less than 10 minutes, New York Times, the Monday crossword, not hard. Tuesday crossword is a little bit more difficult than it goes all the way through Sunday, right? But in my mind, I'm thinking all this. And I said, yeah. So I took out the art section where the crossword usually is, gave it to her, sat down. All right, let's get to work. Your homework from last week was so-and-so. So we started talking about the homework, man. Meanwhile, she said, oh, I need a pen. I said, oh, you fill out the crossword with a pen. I see you. So after the class was over, she brings me the crossword and it's got some of the words filled in. Not a lot because we in class, obviously. And I was very happy about that. We started talking. So the next day I came in with the paper. I pulled out the art section, gave it to her. I said, try this one. She had more of the words than in the Monday. Now I finished the crosswords later that I got home, but it was a beautiful thing because I don't know, that was the first time she ever filled out a New York Times crossword. But the fact that she asked for it gave me encouragement. And the fact that I was able to give it to her gave me us both encouragement. And she left that space with a little bit of an experience that she hadn't had before. That's why you go to an HBCU. I mean, it's fun for all the swag surfing and all the events and all the network and all that, but that's where you go. You come for the classroom. No university, no place to come. But having jailbroken the Black university, I hope that somebody here among the thousands who are joining us every week will do what I did with whatever crosswords you have, whatever newspaper you can find to some young person. And y'all do it together. It's a beautiful thing, but that ain't gonna happen with Trump's people. Let's continue, because to read the newspaper meant Trump would never have been president. So Trump has pioneered, she writes, a style of communication that exploits our distracted, disputatious age. Quote, so many people, particularly in the academic and journalistic circles, think of him as a political revolutionary, end quote. Roderick Hart, a communications professor emeritus at the University of Texas, Austin, told me, quote, and I see him much more as a rhetorical revolutionary. In the previous paragraph, she writes, it is unlikely that Donald Trump has familiarized himself with orality and literacy. She's been talking about Walter Ong's 1982 book and a lot of this article. But she says, but if he did, he might recognize himself in Ong's description. Trump's communication style is perfectly suited to an oral society. He employs epithets, low energy Jeb, little Marco, sleepy Joe, that are easy to remember and repeat. He contradicts himself as though there is no record of his previous statements. Even his writing is almost indistinguishable from his speech. It makes sense. Trump reportedly prefers dictation to composition. His online posts are full of idiosyncratically placed punctuation, capital letters, and exclamation points. Many are memes with little text. One featured an image of an American warship hitting an Iranian airplane with a laser beam and included the phrase, lasers, bing, bing, gone. He's an idiot. But we're in an idiocracy, a post-literate age. I don't care what your policy is. Did you hear him call that man Little Marco? Yeah, beep, the international killer. There is some mixing. You got to adjust, but you don't adjust in a way that descends. You adjust in a way that says, "Let us rise together." It shouldn't be perceived as condescension to anybody other than those who want to stay in the mud. But once you realize you're in the mud, no, not the podcast or the ball players talking about in the mud or the Southern metaphor that they are using, but the idea of somehow being in a precarious position, in fact, perhaps part of a permanent underclass. And these people are counting on that in order to keep us politically inert. But once we rise together. Again, Barbara is saying have 100 days of mobilization to protect voting access. It's difficult during early voting, some of which will start in late summer. You got special elections out there right now. The election to replace Representative David Scott is taking place in Atlanta right now. Early voting. If you're out there in Georgia, if you're in Atlanta, come on now. Let's go. Let's do it. So, understand that these people who are in political leadership are clawing to try to keep it. A place like the Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky got rid of the defense minister this week. He's the one who's the architect of the drone wars as they've been attacking Russia. Why did he get rid of him? The people in the street protesting. This guy was helping us win the war. I'm not taking a side on the war, by the way. War is not the answer, as Marvin Gaye would say, but that gets real complicated when it comes to Russia and it comes to Ukraine. But let's be very clear. Why would Zelensky take out a guy who has been highly successful by all accounts and the people want to stay in as he's helping them win the war by sending all these drones to Moscow? Well, the guy is kind of charismatic. Zelensky, remember, he was a comedian, which is why when he was sitting with Bozo on the sidelines of NATO last week, and they asked him, will you go to Moscow? President Trump said you should go talk to Putin. And then he replied, well, I really can't go to Moscow because there's too many Ukrainian drones there right now. That was his comedic chops. In other words, F you, Trump. But the point is this. He's a comedian. He got in office. This guy right here, he's a war hero, at least up until now, and is being effective. I got to get rid of this guy. Maybe he sees him coming up in the rearview mirror. It's very important to understand. So let's think about this. I'm going to kind of begin to draw this together. Remember last week at the end, we talked about thinking about the periodization in the United States through an Africana Studies lens, which would require rethinking time and space. So instead of 1776 to now, we could talk about 50-year periods, the 50 years between 1776 and 1826, when African people who have to define ourselves against the social structure that has labeled us fought to liberate ourselves. This self-determination, the Haitian Revolution, the Black Seminoles, the 50 years after 1826 to 1876, where Africans convened and planned and renegotiated the terms of the United States and elsewhere to benefit us. The Negro Convention movement in the United States, the Maroon formations throughout the hemisphere, even on the continent of Africa, forming together. The Zulu don't exist in the way that they existed, except they are resisting the British during this period. Shaka, Setswayo, all of these people. And 50 years after that, 1876 to 1926, all Black self-determining spaces, those Black towns building behind the social structure veil, which allow for drawing on our governance formations. 1876 to 1926 is also the period where you see the assertion in the Caribbean and Latin America of similar formations, where you see in Africa the attempt to conquer Africa and the pushback, like from the Ashantis during that same period. It's happening globally. Africans in small numbers finding their way to the UK, which will really bloom in the next 50 years, 1926 to 1976. This is the period of Kwame Nkrumah and George Padmore and Paul and Essie Robeson and Jomo Kenyatta and so many in England, the Pan-African Congresses that took place there, Dr. Du Bois and Amy Ashwood Garvey, of course, being at the Fifth Pack in 1945. This is the period when Africans forced a second Reconstruction in the United States of America to build out Black power, and Africans in the Caribbean created self-determining spaces and won their liberation during this period. Also, the continent of Africa getting political independence and building toward a power base that was based on coming together, only to be interrupted by devilish plans of Europeans and their children, like Europe and the United States, through the CIA, through the British OSS, through all of these collaborating for the moment collaborating entities who had been fighting each other. This is also, of course, the period of World War II, that 50-year period, and they still had enough energy to come together and kill Patrice Lumumba, depose Kwame Nkrumah, go after everybody in Africa who was trying to get them free, and to go in the Caribbean and do the same thing. This is the period where you also see the undermining of those efforts. And then finally, the final 50 years, the one we're in now, 1976 to 2026, where we're responding to the end of empire and an unrelenting assault on African organization and thinking domestically and globally. So as we think about this semi-quincentennial, and we're in that 5th period, and that articulation has me rethinking even the framing questions in our Introduction to Africana Studies course, which we've run 2 times in Nubia, and we'll run again shortly after we take a period after we've read this book to really reflect and have general conversation. And as I'm rewriting my syllabus for Howard, and thinking about this, those periods I think are going to occupy a very important place in how I'm restructuring the Africana Studies work, because at least as it relates to this periodization, it's an ongoing process. But as we think about this, I thought we would spend our last little moment here thinking about how we have resisted, because when we think about voting now, I'm afraid that it's because we live in an increasingly post-literate era, with the age of reading is dying. In this post-literate era, we find ourselves thinking about voting with no memory of how we've used it before. No memory of not only how we fought to acquire it in that 50-year period, particularly that 50-year period preceding this current 50-year period, but then how we used it as we were acquiring it at the state, local, and federal level, particularly in the period after passage of the Voting Rights Act. It wasn't about acquiring the vote just to have the vote. It was a bigger objective that we used, and the vote was part of a larger suite of actions. The state of Texas alone, we could do a whole series just on the state of Texas. And we've talked about that many times here in class. But the important thing to understand is that our political action now, wherever we are in the world, certainly here in the United States, where we're sitting right now, must be informed by study and understanding how to recover the momentum of memory. And that requires rethinking this. So in this past 50-year period, where we see this momentum up, then we see it attacked, we continue to struggle through, it's very important to understand that recovering the momentum of memory does require shorthands like monuments, shorthands like places. We know Bozo is taking signs everywhere, out of everywhere. I went up to New York with my friend Erica Sequoia, her son, Hadi, who were in from Kenya for a time. Of course, Erica is the founding organizer of Philadelphia Freedom School. She was our first director to pull everybody together back in the year 2000. And so they were in town to visit their folks. Shout out to her parents, her elders, our elders. And so we went up to New York. That's a rare thing for me to get to the city. I hadn't been up there probably since we were up there. And I love going to New York, in part to just the bookshop. But on the way out, we stopped by the New York African Burial Ground. Shout out to my man, Jimmy Cleckley, Ranger Cleckley, who when I met him many years ago, when we would take Howard students up there every October during the now destroyed freshman seminar. We would take them up there because Howard played a critical role in the excavation and the preservation and the honoring of the 419 ancestors who represent the thousands more who were buried down there in Lower Manhattan. We went by the monument. Shout out to Reverend Herbert Daughtry and everybody else who was there for the 20th anniversary, Port Libation, and earlier the 10th anniversary. Just glad to be in that space. And it was Sunday, so it was closed, the inside. But I looked in, and I didn't see several of the exhibits that are in the lobby of the Ted Weiss building. I said, have these people attacked this? So I reached out to Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, what's going on, brother? Now Jimmy's not the head ranger at the New York African Burial Ground. He runs all the sites in Lower Manhattan, Alexander Hamilton's house, Stonewall, all that stuff. So, Jimmy, and on your behalf, Jimmy, of everybody who struggles in the National Park Service, brother, we love you. We support you, we surround you, and this too will pass. And so, I came to understand, okay, they had to move some things for administrative purposes, but I did see a sign in there. It was saying something about national security. I'm like, what the hell? I'm looking through the window. I'm telling Erica and how they looked at it. But they didn't know because they hadn't been there before. Barbara Chase Rabeau's Africa Rising statue is too big to take out. It's there. The Cosmogram by the good brother Houston Conwell, whose partner, Kinshasa Conwell, Holman Conwell, was the deputy director of the African American Museum, National African American Museum. It's still there. It's in the ground. But I'm looking for the other stuff, like, what the hell? And then we walked around the corner to where the Africans had been reinterred, and that was intact. Okay. Walked across the street to the Chihuahua statue in front of the courthouse and the little disc medallion in the ground. Okay, that's intact. But the fact that, just like Prof, you said, well, is it racial, the home run contest in Philly? Is it racial? Yeah, I've been to too many of these sites, and I see the subtle changes because I read the language on the signage. They can't destroy the literal building at the president's house, but they can change some signs. But the names of our ancestors who escaped are still there. The Sankofa Pavilion is there, as I talked about. And you got to understand that preservation is important because some people are not going to take the time to read until we, with each other, hold hands and say, let us rise together. And in the moment, those places become sacred sites to visit. They aren't all in the Smithsonian. In fact, most of them aren't in the Smithsonian. In fact, Sister Linda Harris at the Harriet Tubman Museum and Cultural Center in Cambridge, Maryland, it needs help. Go on to their website, Harriet Tubman Cultural Center, and donate some money. Why? Because somebody broke into that center. We were there. The Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations was there last October for several days. The first day that we went, I wasn't able to get out there from DC, but Dr. Stephanie Tisdale, Jack Cole, Angie Porter, Kehinde Graham, all of them went up, and Linda Harris gave them a walking tour of some of the stretch of where Harriet Tubman liberated our people on the eastern shore of Maryland. Spent time at the center, and they sat in just a beautiful transformative moment. When I came up, we were at the sister site to the cultural center. And so somebody broke in, did thousands of dollars worth of damage. She said, I'm trying to raise $10,000 so we can repair. And she was on Roland the other night. Roland's like, no, let's make it 50. And from there, we're going to have a plan for 500 because we need that money. That's a sister site to the Smithsonian sites. And it's beyond the purview of the Smithsonian to harm. Bob Kendrick at the Negro Leagues Museum is beyond the capacity of the Smithsonian people to try to harm, even though Lonnie Bunch has been fighting the good fight. New exhibit at the Smithsonian Castle, which has Harriet Tubman's hymnal in there, donated to the museum by the great Charles Leroy Bloxon, my former boss and a surrogate father in many ways intellectually to me, one of the greatest book collectors of any time in U.S. history. And so all of those things, all of these places are, they're beyond the purview of the Smithsonian to harm. The Negro Southern League Museum in Birmingham that I've talked about, all the places we get to talk about here, many of them are beyond the capacity of these people to harm. And we must go to those places and bring these young people. Shout out to my man, Brent Leggs. Brent Leggs is the president and CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the 11th person to have that title. Before that, he was the founding director and will always be the founding director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. This is a book on the Rosenwald schools. Some of y'all had people who went to the Rosenwald schools. My mama went to one in Russell County, Alabama. A Better Life for Their Children. Julius Rosenwald, Booker T. Washington, and the 4,978 schools that changed America. These are those little black schools. And in this volume, at the end, you've got Brent writing the afterward because his daddy went to a Rosenwald school. That's Brent Leggs right there. And he writes about what it meant to help preserve these, because as the head of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, Brent raised millions of dollars to preserve many black sites. But now he's over the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Bozo, Bobo, baby, we're going to break your political spine and we're going to reach into your throat, your cultural throat, and turn you inside out. And you can take them Project 2025 boys with you, because you're not going to erase our memory, because our literacy, which is at the foundation of our memory, is not only intact, we're going to grow it. We are jailbreaking any attempt for you to try to curate our mind with your bullshit. And especially since now you have now hit upon the strategy to not even think about facts, to just say what the hell you're going to say and keep it going. She talks about George Orwell in that regard in this piece. So if you're around DC, go to the Smithsonian Castle and see the American Aspirations exhibit, the new exhibit. That's social structure. What's going on around the social structure? Brent is walking in both worlds, but in the governance formations, we're in the middle, as I said, of the Freedom School seasons. We also must remember in this semi-quincentennial year that this ain't the first fight we've had. People have been reflecting on the bicentennial year. We've talked, and you, of course, talked to Eddie Glaude, my friend Eddie Glaude, our brother, about his book, America, USA, How Race Shadowed the Nation's Anniversaries. And I thought about this because Eddie writes a whole chapter on the bicentennial, chapter 5, 1976, bicentennial. But here's something Eddie doesn't talk about. Eddie doesn't mention this. In 1970, 6 years before the so-called bicentennial in this country, two brothers, Vincent DeForest and Robert DeForest. Robert DeForest made transition in 2007. Vincent DeForest is still alive in his 90th year. Last I checked, he was in St. Louis. Worked for at least a decade in D.C. These two brothers, one was an architect. Vincent, let me see, who was the architect? Vincent was the architect, the one who's still on top of the earth. His brother's an ancestor. They worked for at least 10 years in D.C. to document African historic sites in the United States. They had a house on Euclid Street here in Northwest D.C., down the street between here and Howard University, which documented sites all over the country. 76 sites they were able to get as national historic landmarks. There had only been 4 of those places that were designated as landmarks in 1970. I'm sorry, 1971, they got 4. I'm sorry, in 1971, there were only 4. They had started this organization in 1970. And then they were able to get 76. 76. They established something called the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation. Eddie doesn't write about this. He writes about a lot of stuff. It's very important documentation, but this one he doesn't. I'm looking for the governance spaces. Who are Black people to each other? Because I'm using an Africana Studies approach. Very interesting. You can go online and look up the this organization. This is the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation. They then went into partnership with the National Park Service. And I mention them because I got a few things that they published. They did reports. National Park Service published the reports. Most of my stuff is in storage, but this one I keep around. Look at this, y'all. This is the National Park Service presents the Frederick Douglass Mobile Theater, the Bicentennial Black American Reflections, an historical drama featuring, recognize any of these names? Cicely Tyson, Roscoe Lee Brown, Brock Peters, and Esther Rolle, produced by the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation and the National Park Service. So when you open this, the brother who wrote this drama, the great John Blassingame, editor of the Frederick Douglass Papers at Yale University, master teacher and scholar, the man who wrote the book The Slave Community and another thick book of first-person accounts of captive Africans called Slave Testimony. That's John Blassingame. Look at the people here who directed and produced the actual play and musical. The great J. Weldon Norris, who's an ancestor now, director for many years of choir at Howard University. Very important. These other names, we could get into them, but they open with "For My People." What were Africans thinking about? Again, literacy. Margaret Walker's poem opens this ritual they had, ritual, meaning cultural meaning making, connecting to the past, meaning movement and memory, in a governance formation, a Black organization started by Black people who then entered into relationship with the federal government in the 250th anniversary to make sure. Now look at the scenes. Scene synopsis. Opening, African welcoming ceremony. Griot and Company. Middle Passage, Griot slave trader and company. So you start at Africa, then slavery, part 3. The dance of the white cow slave auction, Nat Turner, Stephen Pembroke. Number 4, Civil War, Griot and Company. Look, the Griot ain't from the United States. Listen, y'all. Shout out to my friends at My Black Clothing. You know, I try to get Black t-shirts and stuff. Black history didn't start with slavery. They organized something where the jolly, as we would call it, the blood, starts in Africa and then threads through the rest. Classroom, 1914. What? They had classroom? Yeah, Black classrooms. Number 6, Marcus Garvey. Here go the jolly again, the Griot, Marcus and Company. Number 7, Harlem Renaissance. Number 8, The Last Chance Saloon, Finale, For My People. You end up back when you started. The costumes designed and executed by a man that you should all know, an incredible cultural meaning maker named Melvin Deal. Another Professor Mike Malone, who was many years on the faculty at Howard University. This is all DC organized. The music For My People, composed and played by, what's that first name? Richard Smallwood. Stop playing with Black people. Semi-quincentennial people writing books, giving lectures. I don't give a damn who we were to other people. We started our own thing. Shout out to those brothers and shout out to everybody who has worked with them. I mean, I'm just going through this and I'm looking at this And I'm looking at, look at this. Look, just I'll just look, here goes Cicely Tyson. Look at her. Cicely Tyson, who I watched give her speech at the New York African Burial Ground, standing alongside Maya Angelou and Delroy Lindo and everybody else as they dedicated those spaces. The great Roscoe Lee Brown, Lincoln University. You remember him from all of his various artistic endeavors. Brock Peters, my man, Brock Peters. My goodness. You remember him from a lot, if you a certain age, you remember, of course, Esther Rowe. Look at Esther Rowe. And then there's J. Weldon Norris, of course, the Howard University choir director, who I knew well before he made transition. And then Glenda Dickerson, who was the author and director. This is the sister who directed. This is 1976, y'all. And in the semi-quincentennial, we up here talking about Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Do some governance work. Recover our memory. And remember that these Africans, I guarantee you, all of them was registered to vote and all of them voted. Now, that's a speculation, but I suspect it's a speculation built on pretty strong circumstantial evidence. The vote isn't who we are. The vote is a weapon. It's a tool that we use. So understand all of this in the science and technology category. We kind of talked about ways of knowing already. The science and technology, well, I should mention this in terms of ways of knowing. Illiteracy and post-literacy in writing and reading undermines our ability to think of new ideas and make new discoveries. Every human on the planet, all human beings started as oral, mouth to ear. Our memories have diminished as we have moved to writing, whether it be the hieroglyphs, whether it be the cuneiform, whether it be the various scripts that have emerged out of those foundations. And we remain oral. But in some ways, in this digital age, we're now moving through images, moving image literacy and hearing literacy in ways that could undermine the quantum leap we made in terms of writing. Another thing she writes here, which I think is critical, where she says this near the beginning of the piece. She says that that reading and writing is not natural. She says reading has never been natural. Humans have no innate cognitive machinery designed to string letters into words and reconnect them to real world analogs. To read, people had to repurpose regions of their brain used for speech and object recognition. And she goes on, when you don't use that stuff, it atrophies. So I don't want to hear, oh, well, they're not going to read that, make it dumber. She says now schools are not assigning whole books. I know that at Howard. People assigning readings. No, you're going to get the whole book in freedom schools. We want you got to have the whole book. Why? You're going to get the whole book in my class. You can get the whole book in Nubia. I can't do it. Sure you can. Let's do it together. Let us rise together. No belittling. No, you didn't know this. No, nobody want to hear that. We all don't know anything. By ourselves, we know a little. Together, we know a lot. As Nzinga Radabisha used to say, Heru, the longtime president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, shout out to my brother Mario Beatty, who took the baton from her. As Nzinga used to say, just because I don't know what you know don't mean that what I know don't count. We got to do it together. But when we read together, we discuss together, we rise together. It's very important. And then we act together. Science and technology, there's a science of reading. In this article, Rose Horowitz cover article, she also, in this same edition of The Atlantic, there's another article by Judith Shuvlitz. It's very interesting, where she writes about how punctuation is being done away with by these digital natives or redefined. And it was fascinating for me as I was reading it. Let me see if I can find it quickly. That's an interesting article I haven't had a chance to read, but I'll get to that. Full Stop is the name of it. See that? Full Stop. What is punctuation even for? By Judith Shulevitz. She says, I was a novice editor. He was an experienced writer. And the first article he turned in revealed a virtuistic command of comma placement. He opened with long, slow clauses, picked up speed with shorter ones. I'm observing the punctuation in here, the semicolon in particular. Withheld all commas for a gloriously terse statement, thesis statement, and then crash, a mass casualty pileup of appositive phrases. Grammarians, I married him. Anyway, she talks about the fact that the quest to punctuate irony goes back to at least the late 16th century when a printer proposed using a backward-facing question mark. What does it mean? Oh man, this is, let me just read this one example if I can find it here. Yes. She says, little marks can make big things happen. Florence Hazrat reminds us in her new book, On the Mark. From periods to interrobangs, how punctuation remade the world. Probably thought about this when you were talking earlier. Take the one sentence Second Amendment, whose commas have been responsible for a great deal of trouble. Here's the Second Amendment, y'all. Quote, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed, end quote, period, end quote. Until the 21st century, all parts of the amendment were given equal weight, regardless of commas, so that the gun rights granted in the second half were limited to the militias referred to in the first half. In 2008, however, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia affirmed an unusual interpretation that used a comma to downplay the clause about militias, leaving, quote, the people, end quote, with an individual right to bear arms. But the eminent originalist, Scalia that is, of all people, failed to acknowledge an important historical fact. The version of the amendment on which Scalia based his reading, found in the National Archives, is only one among many. Each state ratified a different version of this amendment, Hazrat writes. Some with 2, some with 3, some with 4 commas. Punctuation was not standardized in the founder's time, so the best course of action, she says, is not to read too much into those commas. So the individual right to bear arms, is it in the Constitution or not? Up until Scalia, nah, chief. Then he frees it by using one version. Listen, language matters. Ask anybody who's been shot or threatened with a gun because somebody said, I got a Second Amendment right to have a gun. You don't. What you have is propaganda and post-literacy, increasing post-literacy. So the science of reading is very important. It took me about 5 minutes to read that article. I'm talking about when I was reading it the first time. Some people, it might take 10, 15, 20, 30. Some people might have to stop every other word. But guess what? Eventually, you will get to 5 or 3 or 2. You'll get to very quick. Speed reading is about practice. The less you do it, the harder it's going to be. The technology of the book is very important. Here's a new book that I almost cried when I was telling my students about this book. This book just came out. I got it in New York this weekend. This is Shamil Jeppy, called Writing Timbuktu, the book in West African history. Somebody has finally written a full-scale biography in the contemporary time of the man Ahmed Baba. Ahmed Baba, the great scholar you've heard me talk about before. I brought this to my afternoon class last week because those students are going to South Africa. They're going to Cape Town. And I told them, since y'all going to Cape Town at the end of the month, I want you to look this brother up, Shamil Jeppy. Shamil Jeppy. If you're in, I know Cape Town taps in. The people from Cape Town who come in here every week, y'all please get I'm going to send him an email this week, but y'all get a message to Professor Jeppy. He's an associate professor of history at the University of Cape Town. He founded the Timbuktu Manuscripts Project there. He's the co-editor of The Meanings of Timbuktu. That's another book I have around here. I'd have to show y'all another time. But I'm saying, the book is something that came out of Africa. And in West Africa, it was elevated to the high form. And we have to talk about this thing, the technology of the book. I think about Charles Blockson. I think about the book collectors. I think about the people who trained me like John Clark. Those book collectors, Larry Crow. Those book collectors, Anderson Thompson. Those book collectors, Larry Obadeli Williams, whose picture I keep up on my bookshelf over there, one of the bookshelves. I'm saying these are the people. Dorothy Porter Wesley, who was in league with this Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation. I have a picture of her at a meeting when they was coming together. You gotta have the librarians, y'all. My book collection isn't just books. It's a running annotation of my learning journey. So it's not just stuff. It's stuff connected to lives, connected to people. The arsenal, not an archive. The arsenal, not an archive, a convenient place for original thinking and ongoing conversation with those who have come before, attenuated by the unbroken genealogy of lives. People say, I'm the first in my family to go to college. So am I. What they got to do with learning? Because my father was a book man. He read the paper every day. That's why I read it every day. My mother was a teacher who never got a chance to go in the classroom to teach, but she taught the world, beginning with her children, who she taught how to learn how to read on the steps of that duplex on Lawrence Avenue in South Nashville. I'm sitting here because of my parents. Cultural meaning making. When we see those young men standing around that Octavius Catto statue, all I wish is I could have been there so while they were standing there to whisper a few words to them and listen to them about that statue and its meaning, standing next to the good brother Bob Kendrick. It's very important to understand movement and memory. That's why those places matter. You bring a bunch of 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds who are playing baseball in an all-star game formation because one young man named Ken Griffey Jr., because his father, Ken Griffey Sr., and his mother made sure of it, understood the importance of that connection. His brother, as I showed you all the magazine I got at Rickwood Field in Birmingham, Alabama, his brother, not his biological brother, his brother in the sport and his brother in the culture, CC Sabathia. The game they played on Juneteenth at Rickwood Field, and they play every year, the East-West Classic. And Bob talked about those brothers who come together and do that work. And before they had a clinic for children, not so you could become Major League Baseball players, but because you come out, have some fun with some people and be in community. We had to understand that this is all part of us rocking. People say, I rocks with you. Let's rock together. They are trying to rock our vote, but we got to rock our vote. And in doing it, we're not doing it because the election is so very much at the center of our consciousness. No, we're doing it because once we have attached our literacy back, we can understand that that weapon, that tool will not be given up. I don't say will be not given up easily, will not be given up. So we'll stop with that in Monday night. Again, Second Emancipation, chapters 37 through 40 in Nubia. If you're not in Knarrative yet, join it. Join it. We got a beautiful place now. We continue to build, and you keep adding classes. Proud. Love to everybody involved. And so come on in, Nubia, on Monday night. We're going to finish up the book. Should be a very robust conversation. And if you get a chance, check out the Harry Tubman Cultural Center and Linda Harris. We're going to try to get her on the air at some point. You have her for real proud. Yeah, they broke in her place, which is our place in Cambridge, Maryland. Y'all did that to Harriet Tubman? Don't even worry about it. We got you.
I had a question, or just if you could.
Yes.
I was just talking with Dr. Daniel Black this morning about his next book and the importance of.
Is he still in Ghana?
No, he's back. He's back.
Okay. And he was at the Du Bois Center. I said, yeah, we over here talking about it, crewman. You was over there.
Incredible. But we were talking about this thing, reading. I see a lot of people confused about just because you can read words on a page doesn't make you literate. And I don't think people understand, and then they get bristly because it's like, I can read. But can you just for a minute, give us the difference between being able to sound out words and read and being literate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Prof. Let me just let me see, let's see. All right, here we go. Let me go. All right, here we go. Let's do it like this. It says, Americans, once members of a proudly literate society, read much less than they used to. According to the National Endowment for the Arts, which conducts the most comprehensive survey of the nation's reading habits, fewer than half of all adults reported having read a book of any kind in 2022. Let me pause here for a minute and say, reading words is different than sustained reading of sentences and paragraphs, particularly those that are longer and require thinking. That's why when people go on Google or whatever and they read an AI summary, I reject it immediately. You're reading something that's been filtered through something that's algorithm is trending toward fewer words. The fewer words, the more likely for misinformation. So reading on Instagram, looking at a picture on Instagram and reading a little comment, reading on social media is reading, but your words you're strung together are shrinking your capacity to develop complex thinking. Let's continue. Says only 38% read a novel or short story. A study analyzing 236,000 responses to the American Time Use Survey found that the proportion of Americans who read for pleasure on any given day fell from 28% in 2004 to 16% in 2023. The study looked at people who had read a book, magazine, or newspaper, listened to an audiobook, or read an ebook. They included it all. Gambling has become a more common leisure activity than reading a book. Last year, 57% of Americans placed a bet. The decline in reading cuts across age groups, gender, and education levels. Even the demographics that traditionally read the most, retirees, women, college graduates, have seen a collapse. The books that people do read, here we go, are simpler than they used to be. We've talked about that, Prof, and you've written so much and seen and been a publisher and in the publishing. You see how these books are getting, I would say, uncharitably dumber and dumber. But anyway, New York Times bestsellers today have sentences that are about 1/3 shorter than they were a century ago. Longer sentences aren't inherently better. but their former ubiquity suggests an age when Americans had an inclination and ability to read serious works of literature. In 1958, the English translation of Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago was the best-selling novel of the year, according to Publishers Weekly. Pasternak writes in long, complex sentences. Last year's top-selling novel was Sunrise on the Reaping, the latest in the Hunger Games young adult series. Brian Bannon, the chief librarian at the New York Public Library, told me that young adult fiction is one of the library's most popular offerings. Sounds good, but watch this. Including among decidedly not young adults. And then he goes on, the most popular novel written for adults was the romancy adventure Onyx Storm. Whatever the book's pleasures, it isn't Pasternak. Americans also get much less of their news through reading than they once did. In 1975, about half of 20-somethings said they read the newspaper every day. Today, that's less than 10%. Americans say they get the news on their phones and laptops. 40% say they prefer to watch or listen to online news rather than read it. People say, I can read. Can you? Let's do it. Because I teach students every day. I learn with students every day. And when I tell you that the struggle for students to go through sentences reveals that they've never been asked to go through sentences. Let me see if I can get, here, watch this. Reading has come to seem extraneous even to some of the best educated members of society. Margaret Renix, Harvard's assistant director for humanities and social science support, told me she'd spoken with a student who was struggling to read a book written in Old English. I want to pause here for a minute, remind everybody of what Professor Hunter said at the beginning of our journey today, that she read in the original Latin. That means you got to learn Latin first to read it. Me sitting with Theophilo Obenga, teaching, me and Mario and Valethia sitting with Theophilo Obenga, learning meta nature, and then Obenga saying, okay, class is over, everybody who's studying meta nature, get out. And the class started with like 70 or 80 people in it. By the end of the semester, it was about 10 or 15. Why? Because it cleared out right quick, because this takes time. This was 1994. And then he take us upstairs and we do Attic Greek for another hour and a half. Deb Hurd remembers this, Sister Deborah. And Kathy Adams used to take us through Greek. And then, of course, since then, I can make simple translations in meta nature. I took it with Theophilo Obenga. With some muscle memory and some effort and some discipline, I can do more than that. But the finest student and scholar and teacher of meta nature on the planet today on this side of the ball is Mario Beatty, because he kept going. That is a form of literacy that feeds the other literacies. I stopped. Now let me go back to that was a footnote. So the student came to her struggling because he's reading a book in Old English. The culprit of the book he was reading, Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel, A Clockwork Orange. He thought A Clockwork Orange was in Old English. You think this is the Canterbury Tales? You think it's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? Watch this. The student used ChatGPT to, quote, translate the book into an easier language. What does that mean? When people say they can read, I know you can read texts and emails. I know you can read anything else. With time, the question, my follow-up question when we say we can read is, what are you reading? What are you getting at it? My man, Kenyatta Gilbert down there. I'm not Kenyatta. Kenyatta Gilbert is the dean of the School of Divinity at Howard University. Kenyatta Adenia, one of Asa Hilliard's proteges then in Atlanta. He texts me all the time. I'll text him, what you reading? What you reading? What you reading? If people tell me I'm reading texts, I'm looking at TikTok videos, or I'm reading this book, which is on a third grade level, except it's being sold and adults are buying it, that's reading. It's encouraging. But that's no different than a basketball player saying, what you doing? I'm at T-ball. No, not basketball player. Baseball player saying, I'm at T-ball. Okay, so you going to play T-ball and get to the major leagues? No. It's all swinging a bat, but one of them balls is on a little stick. The other ball, let me finish up. He says, let's see here. Because she goes into the number of words, the types of words, but I want to, okay, here we go. I'll end with this. And yet, strangely, she writes, I'm going back a little bit, Americans are probably reading more words than ever before. What has changed is what they read and how. What are you reading, right, Kenyatta? People are bombarded with emails, text messages, X posts, Reddit threads, Instagram captions. This explosion of textual fragments, oof, that hurts. If anything should hurt, should be that phrase. This explosion of textual fragments has come at the expense of, here it is, at the expense of, the expense of devoting sustained attention to longer written works that convey rich and complicated information. Marianne Wolf, a cognitive neuroscientist at UCLA, you've heard me mention Marianne Wolf, one of her books before, argues that people are losing the ability to think deeply about writing. That doesn't mean they are forgetting how to decode individual words. Rather, they are losing the higher order abilities of comprehension and synthesis. America, in other words, isn't illiterate. You can read. It's post-literate. Hopefully that clears it up.
Yes, thank you. And I will direct people to the book that you recommended several years ago, Stolen Focus. If you want to start to, really understand how you have allowed yourself to have your literacy snatched from you, Stolen Focus is a great book and you can listen to that one, right? Because I put audiobooks in another category and I realized I was atrophying. I've talked about this several times, including in my podcast, my ability to read words on a page, because I spent a year just listening to books because I was walking. And it is a muscle that can atrophy, the sitting down. And I saw how my focus was stolen when I tried to read a book and I struggled to get through a couple of pages. It was scary because I love to read. It was scary. And so I had to get back in. So this year I've immersed myself with reading. And you've been reading in office hours. We read Sky Full of Elephants out loud, word by word, page by page. We read Sula and had Dr. Black come in and help, and people share. We stopped every page, every few pages, people would read out loud and we would, rotate that. And that was transformative. But you can do both. To your point, I just finished Judge Stone on audio because Viola Davis, who is amazing, has brought that book to life in audio form. And I started reading it on the page, but then I'm walking, so I'm doing both. But we have to, it's a muscle. We, just like get up and walk, you lift weights, you have to do it. Right?
Yes. So, it's funny you say that because I have thoroughly, I haven't been able to get into the audiobook, but what I will do and what I do consistently, what I will do today when I go down here, I think I'm gonna go to the National Mall for a minute today and go over there to the castle. I'm gonna read while I'm walking. So I don't be paying attention. I be reading because the thing is, and we know, and she writes about this. Rose Horowitz makes the exact point you just made. She said, audiobooks when you're washing clothes or doing dishes that's something that also counts as literacy. Then she also says that the words on a page, as we both know, because we both had that frustration. When you had the words on the page, it activates a different part of your brain.
Yes.
And if you don't do just the word, which is why Freedom School students know I don't pick books with pictures. I want no pictures in the book. You know what I'm saying? If maybe 2 or 3 pictures in the book, we're not having no pictures in the book. Why? Because you got to train your mind to look at these long ass sentences and this short one and this long and read it like music. There's a music. You're a writer. And what she's saying is AI is going to destroy writing now. The other thing got to reading, now to writing. So when you ask students to write now and you read what they wrote, it looked like the texts.
Yeah.
It looks like why? Because and it's not because they're stupid. It ain't got nothing to do with intelligence. You have been trained to do, and we can reverse it, as you say. Bro.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, and that writing thing, man, when you said it, I winced because even that, because writing's not just words on a page. It's imagination. It's one thought leading to the other. And you're right. I listen while I'm walking because there is a relationship between doing something and listening to something and it sticking with you differently or also sparking other thoughts. Because when I walk in silence, my imagination goes wild, especially early when nobody's out there. No, you can grab things that you can't normally grab, and that you walk and read is amazing. I don't know how you do that and don't
well, that's the thing. I had to be careful at intersection stuff. So how do you handle when you're walking? Because you sound like George Carver. Carver said, I get up in the morning, the plants tell me what they can do. They couldn't figure out how Carver was such an innovative scientist. See what you mean? Walking for me is an act of prayer, he would say. I'm walking through. The plants tell me what they can do. So what, do you find yourself wanting to stop and write stuff down, or do you record it? Because I'm sure as it's coming.
Yeah, no, I try to get home quickly and then,
Okay.
then, you know, send myself a note or whatever. But some things I lose, to your point, you know, because it depends on how long the walk is. But I'm always walking in nature too. I'm not just in the street. I have to be in a park. I have to be around the squirrels, the chipmunks, the birds, all of that. And I have to be there before other people are there. You know, so I'm getting up early at 5:30 in the morning. I'm getting up earlier and earlier so that I can be. So it's not exercise, but it is exercise at the same time. And it's the exercise of the mind, which I think is, or the imagination, which is probably the thing that has been stolen the most from us, is our ability to imagine.
That's right. That's right. Well, y'all, thank you, Prophet. See everybody. Oh, let me mention, I picked up this one other book. I just started reading it, but it cracked me up because I saw this book in New York and picked it up. It just came out, and I started laughing because, you know, what we are doing. I'm just want to show you this book because this is like 60 seconds. I want us to always remember that what we are doing here, not what we're attempting to do, what we are doing is literally both older than everything on the planet in terms of this kind of format of conversation, and already looking past whatever doomsayers are saying. And that in doing it, people maybe one day will write about it or not. It's really not my concern. But this guy, Chad Wellman, who's at the University of Virginia, just wrote a book called After the University, Higher Education and the Future of Intellectual Work. So I saw the cover. Shout out to the people at Book Culture, my friends at Book Culture up there by Columbia University on 112th Street. I was like, what the hell? So I picked it up. He got a chapter in here on Du Bois and the ends of knowledge. I'm like, this is cute. I'm sure I'm going to learn. I shouldn't say that. That almost sounds, that does sound kind of sin. That's interesting. Now, this is the thing. This is Johns Hopkins University Press. I want y'all to look at the print. I guarantee you right now that if I go on my shelf and get a Johns Hopkins University Press book from 10 years ago, more words on the page. One from 30 years ago, even more words on the page. I'm saying this ain't him. I'd be willing to bet all the money I got in the world that his editor was like, this is a University Press book. But the real reason I wanted to show everybody is what he's writing about. Yeah, we're already doing it. So understand, don't think this is, we already doing it. There's a lot of people who write about stuff and put them in, somebody has written about this, who gave a couple of presentations on the African Bicentennial Corporation. But don't undervalue the intellectual work we are doing, because at this stage, most of the people who call themselves in the academy are writing about what it would look like. We already doing it. So I want to thank you, Prof, to say, we appreciate you.
I love you.
All right.
Thank you.
Love you too.
All right, y'all. See y'all next week.